In August 2026, Nintendo told investors something that should have been impossible. Sales were down. Profit was up 150%. This is a company that started out selling hand-painted playing cards in Kyoto and ended up owning Mario, Zelda, and Pokémon. Here's how a card company built one of the strangest, most durable businesses in the world. Nintendo was founded on September 23, 1889, by a craftsman named Fusajiro Yamauchi. His product was hanafuda, traditional Japanese playing cards, hand-painted one at a time. For 6 decades, that was essentially the whole business. Leadership passed not by blood, but by adoption. Yamauchi had no son, so the company passed to his son-in-law, and then to that son-in-law's grandson, a 21-year-old named Hiroshi Yamauchi, in 1949. Hiroshi inherited a small, sleepy card company and immediately saw its ceiling. Playing cards were a mature market with nowhere left to grow. Instead of defending that shrinking territory, he decided the company needed to become something else entirely, even though nobody, including him, yet knew what. What followed was 2 decades of a company trying on identities. Nintendo tested a taxi company, a love hotel chain, instant rice, even a television network. Most of it went nowhere. But in 1965, Yamauchi hired an engineer named Gunpei Yokoi, who had built a toy grabber arm on the factory floor just to kill time. Yamauchi turned it into a product, the Ultra Hand. It sold over 1 million units. That single hit reframed the whole company. Yokoi became Nintendo's in-house tinkerer, and his philosophy, using cheap, well-understood parts in clever new ways instead of chasing the newest technology, became something close to a house religion. Decades later, it would justify shipping deliberately underpowered hardware while every competitor chased raw horsepower. By 1980, Nintendo's handheld Game & Watch line had sold over 43 million units and taught the company how to manufacture electronics at scale. Then, in 1981, a young designer named Shigeru Miyamoto built an arcade game called Donkey Kong, starring a barrel-throwing ape and a mustachioed carpenter who'd later be renamed Mario. It was a hit, and it landed just in time. In 1983, the North American video game market collapsed, flooded with cheap, low-quality games. Nintendo's answer was the Famicom, rebuilt for the US as the Nintendo Entertainment System, deliberately disguised to not even look like a game console. It shipped with a locked licensing system and a strict seal of quality, a direct response to the flood that had just poisoned the market. Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda followed. By 1990, Nintendo controlled roughly 80% of the global games market. The Game Boy, released in 1989, doubled down on Yokoi's philosophy. A black-and-white handheld with a slow processor, chosen deliberately because it sipped battery power and cost almost nothing to build. Packaged with Tetris, it sold 118 million units. But the 90s also brought Nintendo its first real fight. Sega's Genesis, and later Sony's PlayStation, pushed harder on raw power and edgier marketing than Nintendo would match. Nintendo's console share fell from its 1990 peak to around 45%, even though the Super Nintendo technically outsold the Genesis worldwide. It was the first sign that owning the best characters wouldn't automatically win every generation. In 1996, a designer named Satoshi Tajiri released a pair of Game Boy games about catching and training creatures called Pokémon. It became a global phenomenon. Games, a trading card game, an anime series, and eventually one of the highest-grossing media franchises ever made. In the West, it also triggered a wave of moral panic over trading cards and video game addiction, noise that did nothing to slow it down. Pokémon proved something Nintendo would lean on for the next 3 decades. A well-designed character franchise could generate revenue far beyond the console it started on. Nintendo's cleverness has always coexisted with genuine failure. The Virtual Boy, released in 1995, gave players headaches, shipped with only 22 games, and was discontinued within a year. The GameCube, in 2001, was well-engineered, but sold only about 21 million units, a distant third behind the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. Nintendo's leadership took a clear lesson from that stretch. Competing head-on with Sony and Microsoft on raw power was a fight it was structurally unlikely to win. It needed a different battlefield entirely. Under Satoru Iwata, the company's first president from outside the Yamauchi family, Nintendo made its pivot explicit. Instead of chasing more power, a crowded market already dominated by deeper-pocketed rivals, it would chase more people, non-gamers, families, casual players who'd never owned a console. The Nintendo DS with its dual screens and stylus, and the Wii with cheap motion controls, both bet on accessibility over specs. It worked. Wii Sports became Nintendo's best-selling game ever, and the Wii briefly outsold consoles twice as powerful. Nintendo's current president later called this deliberate strategy the Blue Ocean, finding water nobody else is swimming in. It didn't always hold. The Wii U in 2012 was ambitious but confusingly marketed, and it sold so poorly it genuinely threatened Nintendo's future as a hardware company. Then, in 2017, came the Switch, a hybrid console fusing Nintendo's handheld and home traditions into one device, again built on modest, efficient hardware instead of cutting-edge specs. You could play the exact same game on your TV, then slide it into your bag on the way out the door. It went on to sell over 156 million units, making it one of the best-selling consoles ever made. Iwata didn't live to see it ship. He died suddenly in 2015, at 55, while the console that would become the Switch was still just an internal code name. He was remembered for a line he used constantly, on stage and in shareholder letters alike. On his business card, he was a company president. But in his heart, he was a gamer. His successors carried the Switch across the finish line under exactly the philosophy he had set: build for people, not for specs. In 2020, as the world went into lockdown, the Switch became one of the hottest consumer products on the planet. Animal Crossing, New Horizons, a slow game about paying off a raccoon's mortgage on a parceled-out island, sold over 40 million copies and briefly made Nintendo one of the best-performing stocks in Japan. It was proof that a 20-year bet on approachable, broadly appealing games couldn't have been better timed for a moment when everyone, suddenly, was stuck at home. Its 2025 successor, the Switch 2, had already reached nearly 24 million units sold by mid-2026. And the business underneath those numbers is still the one Yamauchi and Yokoi built. Control the hardware, control the software, and let a handful of evergreen characters, Mario, Link, Pikachu, carry the ecosystem across decades. That IP is now a business of its own: movies, theme park attractions, merchandise. Licensing revenue was up over 100% in a single quarter, driven largely by a hit film franchise built on a character born in a barrel-throwing arcade game 45 years earlier. Nintendo's real story was never about video games. The company spent 90 of its 137 years without making a single one. It's about a repeated willingness to walk away from a market it couldn't dominate, in favor of one it could define on its own terms. Every stumble came from drifting back to competing on someone else's rules. Every comeback came from the instinct a 21-year-old running a card company arrived at, with nowhere left to grow. Find the game no one else is playing, and make it yours.